It's all connected. Environmental stressors trigger the freeze response, hibernation state, which is shutdown, catatonia in autism, and chronic illness in general. Naviaux cell danger response and a nervous system under threat. The 2016 study by Dr. Robert Naviaux shows aversion to glucose as a fuel with preference for fat as a fuel. This suggests why people with ME/CFS and other such chronic diseases may do better with ketogenic diets that use fat as the primary fuel. An intelligent process gone awry. A hypometabolic cell danger response is an intelligent physiological, biological, chemical, and epigenetic process that has gotten prolonged. Dr. Robert Naviaux research. 5 broad groups of triggers. 1. Biological, viral, bacterial, fungal, mold, parasitic infections. 2. Chemical exposures. 3. Physical trauma. 4. Psychological trauma. 5. Unknown. Our autonomic nervous system, ANS, manages and regulates physiological functions such as blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, immune activity, digestion, mitochondrial function, energy levels, metabolism, and more. It supports these functions by directing cellular, metabolic, and other underlying processes in our physiology in certain times, such as in those that involve many organ systems and chronic illness. And it does so outside of our conscious control or awareness. One of the branches of the autonomic nervous system can cause hibernation-like states in humans. It originates in the brainstem, which is where the cell danger response is regulated. When the cell danger response is chronically activated, the coordination between the 2 limbs of the vagus is disrupted. This results in disinhibiting the sympathetic nervous system, no longer inhibiting fight-flight reactions, and the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA, which dominate during illness. The following references support the sections below on the autonomic nervous system and polyvagal theory, including Peter Levine, In an Unspoken Voice, How the Body Releases Trauma and Restores Goodness. Very good book. Trauma and the Body, A Sensory-Motor Approach to Psychotherapy by Pat Ogden, another great book. In this video, I'll mainly focus on the freeze response to threat.
There's a whole range of how freeze is going to manifest. Everything from an out-of-body experience or catatonia to like, I dinged my little pinky and there's a little bit of numbness there. So it can be this really micro expression of it all the way to this, massive systemic shutdowns with less emotion, with less less sensation, with less, sort of input from the outside, I can have less of a discrete experience of myself and of borders and boundaries. I don't feel where I begin and end. Suddenly, I can receive and perceive things that are outside of myself, and in fact, I'm not even sure where outside of myself might be. My sense of self is important to build, but it's basically built around I like it, I don't like it, the approach avoidance system, what's red and what's blue. I'm a person who likes sashimi. I'm a person who really enjoys ramen. I'm a person who is a mover, I like movement, and there are certain things that I don't like, and, like scratchy t-shirts or something, right? I mean, there's a whole, that's me. But if you ask somebody in this state, oh, do you like t-shirts that are maybe more bamboo or soft cotton or stuff? It's like, I don't know. Do you want to go see a movie? Yeah, I don't know. It's like, yeah, what do you want to see? I don't know. What do you want to see? I don't know. What do you want to see? And so it's undifferentiated. I'm not sure. What do you like? What do you think I should like? I'm not sure. I don't have my reds and blues identified. I'm undifferentiated.
So if you are in a state of freeze, shutdown, then there is lethargy, deadness, exhaustion, chronic fatigue, disorientation, disconnection, dissociation. And then, of course, you are not there. You have no feelings. You are passive. You can't decide what you like or not, what you want or not. You can't say no. You can't say yes. So it is important to get out of this state of freeze and learn to differentiate between what you want and don't want, what you like and don't like. Mapping yourself out. I look at it like a puzzle. You put all those pieces together, have a frame, and then suddenly you see clearly. So when you have put all the pieces together and a clear picture has formed, that's when you are out of freeze. And you have ego strength, which is a positive thing. You are dynamic because you are fully visible for yourself and for others as well. You know where you end and others begin. You know how to draw boundaries and say no or say yes to things you want.
So part of what we're trying to do is help them differentiate by going, okay, yeah, would it be better for you to sit or stand? You want to talk, not talk. You want to sit over here, over there. You want the blinds up or blinds down? Do you like this? Do you not like this? Do you like that? Do you not like that? And all of that is beginning to identify and create self. And that's, for people that are in the whole non-dual thing, that's a problem. It's like, hey, wait a minute, aren't we trying to get that? You can't transcend self till you got one. And so we're trying to build then ego strengthening by building that sense of, hey, I'm this. I like this. I don't like that. And my reds and blues and the clearer differentiation, definition of those creates a sense of where and how I am in terms of emotional and cognitive definition, and then hopefully also a bit of the sensation that goes with that. This is me. That's ego strength. And to be able to get feedback of like, oh, now I'm choosing to take this action, and I can actually have a thought, oh, now I'm going to take this action and follow through with that and get feedback on it. That reinforces this agency that says, I can do this, I can. And the first word of that is I. Like, I have capacity, I have agency, I can act on the world, and the world gives me feedback that I just did that. As opposed to Botox face, right? Botox face is no response. And that's where I don't exist, because what I do gets no feedback. So feedback is key, and that builds back ego strengthening that then we can take into, say, a freezy state, and then all of that can dissolve. All of that can let go. And again, part of the reason that Jack Kornfield and others had me talk to their teachers is because people get into freezy states and they begin to disappear, but without the ego strength to say, ah, yes, now I feel released from self, rather than I'm fragmenting and I don't know where I am. That's the red side is, I am disappearing, I'm going where? And the blue side is, I'm released from this conditioning, and I feel the participation with everything that is, without distinction. So that's a pretty big blue, right? And the unhooking of the reds from that blue is really key, so we can just get that state of dorsal vagal. So, but it's that, to me, the end game is biological synchrony, which means all of these states are working in concert. That is, I've got access to my freeziness, I've got access to those states and all the benefits of those states, I've got access to sympathetic arousal, and the freezy business is oneness, non-identification, non-attachment, and sort of emotional neutrality, or on the red side, flatness. And then on the sympathetic side, sympathetic is really good at the honing of attention. So I have singleness. So at the same time I'm everything, the sympathetic says I'm this. And I can hold those apparently paradoxical poles at the same time. And I've got this singularity and focus and energy. So I like focus and energy. Freezy business is got everything.
So this is the goal, having everything. Balance. And because I have this tendency to go into the freeze, shutdown, catatonia, I also need to be aware what will prevent it and what will cause it. So, as Steve Hoskinson explained, it is either orienting and regulating or disorienting and dysregulating the nervous system.
Physiological milestones or markers of how you might recognize freeze. An oxygen conservation system, you might see people that are very soft and like, hey, I'm really non-threatening, and so I seem just really laid back, but in fact my system is expressing freeze. The signs of the dorsal vagal system are not the motility, not the prosody, difficulty in getting vocalization going, even, is in there. And then there are other larger signs that people will report. Oh, and one of them that's going to be key is just immobility. Degrees of immobility, numbness, like that's freezy. If you have immobility in the eyes, that's immobility. And the 1,000-mile stare means my eyes are not in motion and they are not registering emotionally. Gosh, I'm so tired now. I feel just so tired. Like if it's the eyes that feel heavy, or to be able to get into a position where you don't have to hold anything up, where you can just go into this. Because freeze is, as a conservation stage, as a conservation phase, is also a rest phase. Some of the blues of freeze are retreat. Like, oh, I'm going to go on a mini retreat right now. Mini respite, recharge. And that recharge shuts things down. One of the best ways of thinking about freeze is like bandwidth exceeded, so I have to shut things down, decrease the throughput, and decrease the input. So it shuts down the demands for processing, and then the system comes back, and we're back online again, okay, and operating fully. And once the demand for processing really begins to meet better the bandwidth. So some of those feelings of like heaviness are really key, and to just be able to allow that to come in. It can be super pleasant, you know, just not to have to do anything.
However, if you are in a prolonged state of freeze, in a prolonged cell danger response through environmental stressors, it can cause symptoms and chronic illness, a metabolic state of hibernation that is not in your head. Freeze. Environmental stress affects your brain. Dr. Robert Naviaux research. As you see, the science also applies to other chronic illnesses, including autoimmune diseases of all kinds. Some diseases reflect bodies caught in survival states of fight and flight, while others, like ME/CFS, are from a body caught in a state of freeze. Going into states of freeze happens when our two forms of self-protection, fight, flight, and tend and befriend, are either unsuccessful or unlikely to succeed. Shutting down and going into hibernation and other freeze-like hypometabolic states is a cell danger response pathway designed to maximize survival when fighting, fleeing, and connecting are not available options. As Naviaux asserts in his 2016 article, the state of freeze is an evolutionary conserved, genetically regulated hypometabolic state similar to dower that permits survival and persistence under conditions of environmental stress, but at the cost of severely curtailed function and quality of life. In freeze, our own blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, and oxygen levels can also go down. We may feel slow or foggy-headed. We may disconnect and watch the event unfold as if we're standing outside of our bodies or watching from the ceiling, or we may feel numb, limp, or unable to move. We may also feel exhausted or too weak to stand. As Naviaux further explains, when we live in states of relative freeze for prolonged periods, it comes with a recognizable set of changes in our bodies and physiologies. Dower is comprised of an evolutionarily conserved and synergistic suite of metabolic and structural changes. This state makes it possible to live efficiently by altering a number of basic mitochondrial functions, fuel preferences, behavior, and physical features. Changes linked with hypometabolism run in the opposite direction of the acute cell danger response. which, as mentioned earlier, is consistent with sympathetic states of fight and flight. The metabolites Naviaux identified in ME/CFS patients reflect a fundamental reset in our physiology that is consistent with freeze. This pathway, opposite to the acute cell danger response, includes the following: energy conservation and death-like states, whose primary goal is survival despite the cost. Organism geared towards survival via inaction rather than action, to wait out overwhelming threat. Decreased immune system ability to fight infection. Loss of antibacterial and antifungal activity. A decrease in the ability to restore high-energy phosphate stores after exertion. This relates to mitochondrial ATP and energy production. Normal or low blood pressure. Aversion to glucose as a fuel, with preference for fat as a fuel. This suggests why people with ME/CFS may do better with ketogenic diets that use fat as the primary fuel. For me, this is definitely true, and I first needed to switch my way of eating from plant-based to meat-based and fat-adapted, and this really turned things around. However, because there is nervous system dysregulation still going on, I also need to include nervous system work in various forms. Loss of intestinal mucosal integrity and leaky gut. Decreased gut absorption as part of a hypometabolic survival response. Changes in DNA methylation and histone modification that alter gene expression. Epigenetic changes. Stress-induced cholesterol pathways, which are different from routes used in health. Altered mitochondrial function, and the finding that mitochondria represent the front lines in cellular defense and innate immunity. Their rapid metabolism makes them canaries in the coal mine for the cell. Low cortisol is another shift that happens as part of nervous system response to threat. Low cortisol is common in late phases of PTSD and in adults with a history of adversity in childhood as well as in their parents' lives. Cortisol is measured as part of a physiological, biological response, like other physiological effects of environmental stressors, including trauma and adversity. It is not a psychological effect, but a biological effect. Low cortisol is seen in many chronic diseases, such as fibromyalgia, cardiovascular, and gastrointestinal diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, and thyroid disease. Low levels of cortisol are not a problem of adrenal exhaustion, but the result of a body responding to prolonged threat in a directed rather than accidental way. In mast cell activation syndrome, you have many common triggers. like foods, alcohol, odors, temperatures. For me it's summer heat, exercise, that's also causing too much heat in the body, too much stress. So the triggers are physical, emotional, and environmental stress, which will cause fatigue, unpredictable symptoms, and then your quality of life is really quite impaired if you don't get a grip on it. Metabolic features and regulation of the healing cycle. A new model for chronic disease, pathogenesis and treatment. In chronic illness, the original triggering event is often remote and may no longer be present. Emerging evidence shows that most chronic illness is caused by the biological reaction to an injury and not the initial injury or the agent of injury itself. Post-traumatic stress disorder can occur months or years after a bullet wound has healed. If healing is incomplete between injuries, more severe disease is produced. Progressive dysfunction with recurrent injury after incomplete healing occurs in all organ systems, not just the brain. Chronic disease then results when cells are caught in a repeating loop of incomplete recovery and re-injury, unable to fully heal. This biology is at the root of virtually every chronic illness known, including susceptibility to sequential or recurrent infections, autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, diabetic heart and kidney disease, asthma, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, chronic fatigue, cancer, affective disorders, psychiatric illnesses, Alzheimer's, dementia, and many more. The common threats of fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome. More than half of people diagnosed with fibromyalgia fit the bill of chronic fatigue syndrome too. Fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome are both illnesses characterized by extreme amounts of fatigue. In fact, the conditions seem to be so intertwined that the medical community continues to debate whether fibromyalgia fatigue is simply a different expression of the same disorder that causes CFS.
Often misdiagnosed, fibromyalgia can result in severe pain that may interfere with the ability to perform even the simplest tasks. Dr. Robin Dorr is a rheumatologist at St. Joseph's Hospital right here in Orange, and she's an expert in treating this syndrome. Robin, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Larry. I appreciate it.
What is fibromyalgia exactly? What do the words mean and what is it?
Well, fibromyalgia, myalgia means pain, and fibro just means in the connective tissue. So patients who have this syndrome hurt all over. And if you look at the definition, it's chronic, widespread pain. So pain all over your body, but there are actually 18 predefined tender points where in order for someone to be diagnosed with fibromyalgia, they need to have at least 11 out of 18 of these tender points. And fibromyalgia is, in your patient's case, in the chest wall, it can be in the back, it can be in the calves, it can be along the side of the hips, it can cause headaches, but it's not in the joint. There's no swelling with joints in fibromyalgia. Some people with lupus or rheumatoid arthritis that are autoimmune diseases have what we call secondary fibromyalgia, where they have pain in the muscles as well as the joints.
Let me ask you about these points. Are these like trigger points where you touch it and they have to be tender, or is it just they say I have an ache here and I have an ache here in these areas, or do you have to precipitate the pain by touching it?
You need to precipitate the pain by touching it, and classically these patients are hypersensitive to everything. They can be hypersensitive to light, to touch,
really? Yeah.
to smell. I have a patient who brings in her own lamp because the fluorescent light bothers her eyes.
Wow.
That many can only wear cotton clothing because the synthetic fabrics bother them. But so they are, or smells, or different foods, or tastes. And it's really a hypersensitivity syndrome where things easily bother them. And that's one reason it's so difficult to treat them, is because the medicines that we use bother them as well.
Oh, you're really stuck. So is it something at the nerve endings, or is it more the central brain perceives the pain in a different way, or is it really the nerve endings? In other words, if you do a block, will you have less pain? Or
No, it's really coming from an imbalance of chemicals in the brain.
Really?
We know of at least 3 chemicals and probably more: serotonin, norepinephrine, and substance P. And these are pain modulators. People don't have enough of norepinephrine and serotonin. These are chemicals that help people feel less pain, and they don't have enough of this in fibromyalgia.
So I am taking vitamin B6. Vitamin B6 is a cofactor in the synthesis of neurotransmitters like dopamine, epinephrine, GABA, norepinephrine, and serotonin, affecting alertness, cognition, memory, and mood. It helps increase brain serotonin and dopamine levels, and it will decrease anxiety, depression, fatigue, and pain. That's why I additionally supplement with diamine oxidase, nootropics, thiamine, and other B vitamins and vitamin D, omega-3.
Substance P, that stands for pain, these patients have too much of it.
I see. So it's an imbalance of those chemicals.
That's right. So it's very difficult to treat.
The SSP, by creating a physiological state, by creating the resource of that neural platform, is also creating a platform for we could say hypothetically, because we're not there measuring it with tools, hypothetically for neurogenesis, for neuroplasticity. Why can we make that statement? Because physiological state affects the accessibility to various parts of the brain. And we all know that, because if you're in a meltdown or a tantrum, tell me how well your cognitive functions are. So we know that executive functions and certain cognitive functions are not accessible in certain physiological states. So SSP is creating that neural platform that hopefully will promote neuroplasticity and better coordination of movements with thoughts, movements, and feelings.
Integrated listening systems. The Safe and Sound Protocol. This non-invasive intervention involves listening to music that has been processed specifically to retune the nervous system, regulating state, to introduce a sense of safety and the ability to socially engage. This allows the client to better interpret not only human speech, but importantly, the emotional meaning of language. Once interpersonal interactions improve, spontaneous social behaviors and an enhanced ability to learn, self-regulate and engage are often seen. So, I don't care about social engagement too much. However, my nervous system is seriously dysregulated, And as you have seen from the last videos on catatonia, there is that tendency to freeze and go into shutdown, as described by Dr. Amita Shah in her book Catatonia, Shutdown and Breakdown in Autism. So Moskowitz has suggested that general catatonia may be due to an intense evolutionary-based fear response, closely related to the tonic immobility strategy used by animals in threatening situations. There is some interesting research on ways in which stress may be related to brief shutdown and freezing in neurotypical people. These researchers have suggested that under everyday stresses, the prefrontal cortex can shut down, allowing the amygdala, responsible for regulating emotional activity, to take over, inducing mental paralysis and panic. This can affect conscious self-control and executive function. It is encouraging that research is focusing on possible neural circuits responsible for the freeze response in stressful, fear-inducing and threatening situations. This line of research will have huge implications for understanding autism and catatonia. So this is the autism side of freeze. But I also have those rages out of the blue. And sometimes it's really hard to calm down. I have my methods, so for example I push a wall and I do this in a titrating way, which will engage the prefrontal cortex, and this is regulating instead of dysregulating. If you just rage on, it can actually trigger you even more so. But if you do it in a controlled way, it can really help you calm down. So this is one method I use. But still, I would really like to get a handle on this dysregulation, because it also has a big influence on my health. It can trigger pain in the body, such as migraines, fibromyalgia, mast cell activation, and then I have all those histamine related symptoms, feeling exhausted. But you can say it is actually all part of the freeze response. So this is my hope. And today I had the second session of the Safe and Sound protocol, but a few hours later I threw up. So I'm not sure if my nervous system is overreacting, because I have a very sensitive hearing. I have indeed in the past also felt nauseated by too much sound, but the last time I was actually fine, except for having a migraine, but the migraine had started before the session and was rather hormonally related. So yeah, I will keep trying and hopefully it will really improve my overall well-being. I'm kind of desperate, but it sounds really positive. Have a listen.
I wanted to share what the Safe and Sound protocol has done for my little guy. He's 5 years old. He's an amazing little one. A little bit of background, he came to us at 2 years old through the foster care system, and from the time I met him, I was completely in love, as many adoptive parents understand that feeling. He has been diagnosed with moderate autism or level 2 autism, fetal alcohol syndrome, disinhibited social engagement disorder, or RAD, ADHD, hyperkinesis, frontal lobe deficit, and conduct disorder. When he came to us, he was a very aggressive, yet very happy and joyful, but when he wasn't, he was extremely aggressive, and it would seemingly come out of nowhere, but we could tell that he had no control over these emotions, and he was having rages that were over an hour long, and there were multiple times a day. I could not take him to the grocery store even alone. We would go with his behavior therapist a couple times a week, and every time we would go, he'd have anywhere between 2 to 3 meltdowns each time, and it had gotten to the point where we wouldn't take him outside because he could get outside of our fence, and when he did, he would run and go to the neighbors and cross the street. It was a huge safety factor. Prior to the SSP, he literally was trying to escape our house on a constant basis. I would catch him now, post SSP. I can't tell you the last time he's tried to escape our house. He's gone out the fence twice, I think. But even those times, if we request that he comes back, he comes back. I feel like it was pretty much 100% non-compliance most of the time, and it was very hard. After the SSP, we got about, I'd say 50% of the time he would listen, and it was just amazing, and it's only continued to improve. We did do some other therapies that I think helped with the compliance in a big way, but I know that it wouldn't happen without the SSP, and so that was huge. I mean, every day I sit back and I think about where he's come from and where we are now. It's overwhelming. Just getting him in a car seat daily used to end in him beating up on me, pulling my hair, scratching me, spitting at me, punching, and it was such a struggle, and to keep him safe and get him in there. I can't tell you the last time. It's no longer even an issue. Post Safe and Sound protocol, we're not experiencing daily meltdowns or rages. Definitely not rages. We don't see the screaming like we used to, or we see something that's more of a typical toddler meltdown, as what I would call it. He's able to suddenly regulate his emotions in a manner that even if he does get upset, he can come out of it very quickly. Also, going shopping, I can take him places without assistance, so he can focus now where before he couldn't. You could put him in front of a game, an iPad, anything, and it would never hold his attention more than a minute, maybe sometimes a few minutes, but he'd be gone. Now he's able to sit for periods of time alone and do things on his own. Every therapist we've seen, neuropsychologist, his pediatrician, they have all told us to be looking at residential treatment facilities because he was only getting stronger and his emotional regulation was non-existent. I no longer worry for him. I